Begin Self-Publishing episode number 82. New year, publish that amazing smash hit book.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
It's a brand new year, it's 2017, and yet another solo show, which is usually a sign that I haven't booked the guests in properly. I think there'll be a whole rash of guest interviews, because I've had quite a few people come back all at the same time. But to start in the new year, I thought I'd have a bit of almost a recap show, where I go over what I've actually learned from doing this podcast. Firstly, I'm not one for predictions, because if I look back at my own life, there was no way I would have predicted where I would be now 10 years ago. And even within a year, it's quite hard to actually predict things. It tends to be the totally unexpected things that come and blindside you on some random day that make the biggest impact in a year. However, I know a lot of people do start the year with goals and resolutions and things they want to change. And I think that is a healthy exercise. And a very popular thing that people do is to say that they want to publish a book. So I thought I would give a quick summary of the advice I would give somebody who had this New Year's resolution or this New Year's goal from my own humble experience. First tip I would have is that while planning is not essential, it helps a lot. It's perfectly possible to write something in a couple of days and then to spend a day or two rushing through the stages of doing a quick proofread, if you're lucky, getting into Canva or Word and trying to produce your own cover, and then quickly uploading it onto Amazon, just ticking all the standard boxes, quickly looking at all the categories and just picking one at random. And in that way, self-publishing is still very easy. And there are a lot of people who do this. They just say, oh yes, I want to have a book on Amazon. If your pure aim is to have a book on Amazon, then it is still fairly easy to do that if you buy the right software. And when a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to tell you how to self-publish a book, that's kind of what they're referring to. Now, the great problem with this is that while this approach might have led to instant wealth and success in, say, 2010 or 2011, now there's a whole load of other people who've done this. And if it's purely to say that you've got a book on Amazon, yeah, I suppose there's no problem with just rushing through everything, not worrying about the odd typo here or there, or the fact that your cover looks like some 1980s record cover. And there may be people who that's what they wanted to do. But even if you use this approach of a book as a business card or a book as a status symbol, then do you really want your book to look like a business card that somebody's just written down in a cheap biro or some other cheap pen, felt tip pen on a bit of withered paper? Because that's in effect what you're creating if you rush through everything when trying to self-publish a book. Sure, it's easy enough to do, but you're much better off to have some element of planning involved before you rush into just self-publishing or writing a book. And there's an awful lot of good help and advice out there. There's also an awful lot of bad help and advice out there. My second piece of advice is taking things from the other extreme. Really, it's not that hard. This is aimed at people who are worried about publishing a book because they think it's really hard and it's going to be a tremendous amount of work, and they're really worried about that. Now, obviously you can spend as much time as you have on writing a book. And there are some people who make an enormous fuss about how they're writing a book and how they're sacrificing their entire life to it. A lot of this is coming back to a lack of planning as much as anything. Or there are people who overplan every single item. They want to do everything right, so they spend all their time doing courses about marketing or learning how to improve their writing craft or how to market the book in a particular way. And you're never going to get anything perfect. The best way to get perfect at self-publishing is to self-publish books. And the first few books probably won't be perfect. I mean, an awful lot of people don't give any thought about marketing their books or any real time to editing, and they don't spend any money on the cover. And if you're somebody who gives some thought to those, however inexperienced you might be, you're ahead of the game on a lot of people. So it's not worth just getting into this analysis paralysis where you don't do anything because you're worried about the fact that you might not do it perfectly. That's something you can work on and improve on later books. You can even take the approach of people like Tony Brown, who I interviewed about systems, and start building up a checklist of things you do every time you self-publish a book, so that the next time you can look to see if there's anything you can improve, and you can do everything right that you did in the first time. So I wouldn't go to the other extreme and almost end up with this military operation for self-publishing a book. Unless that's the sort of thing that appeals to you, obviously, there's nothing wrong with having an organised and a planned approach. But really, writing a book should not be something that would take your entire year up in terms of activities. I'm not saying that you can't take a year to write a book, or 2 years to write a book, or 5 years to write a book. But if that is the only thing you're doing, then you're probably over-planning. My third piece of advice, which I've said before, and perhaps is a little bit controversial, but I would say start small. Start with a smallish ebook and learn the ropes in terms of maybe hiring editors, looking at cover design, formatting, and marketing the book. Because if you start with something fairly small, then a lot of those costs are going to be a lot less. Now, obviously, you may not, depending on the genre, you may not be able to charge anywhere near as much as for a normal size, say, fiction book. But you're better to think of that first book as a way of learning how to self-publish on the job, so to speak, rather than expecting your first book to be a breakout hit success. It might be, certainly if you take a lot of advice from podcasts like this one and you spend your time making sure you do the right kind of things, it might be a hit. But if you start small and you make mistakes, then it's not as significant as if you've written this 750,000 word novel and it's going to cost you a huge amount of money to get edited. It's going to have to be sold for about $9.99 because it's just such a large ebook. And I think starting small is a sensible option. And obviously you don't have to do this. But I would start with a small ebook and then gradually work up to larger ebooks and then paperbacks as well. I mean, paperbacks aren't particularly hard if all you want it is to be available on Amazon. CreateSpace provides fairly simple and easy to use service to get your book available to be ordered on Amazon. Making your book be available in bookstores is a lot more complicated. But even with that, it's not exactly rocket science. But you do need a certain book length to be able to produce a book as a paperback. And certainly starting with ebooks means that you don't in effect have any minimum limit in terms of length. Now obviously you probably wouldn't want to be doing like a 10-page ebook. But maybe a 50 or 60-page ebook isn't necessarily a bad place to start. My fourth piece of advice is one that partly the artistic side of me does balk at a little bit, and that is to think about the market. Now, it may be the case that you're not into writing for sales. You may be trying to make some political point, or you may be trying to just have a wonderful looking book out there that you can tell people you've written. But even so, I think there is there is a certain amount to be said for doing the research before you write the book. Working out what categories and what keywords people would use for searching for topics similar to your book concept, and then maybe looking to change the title and some of the contents, and when you're writing the blurb for the book, have those details in mind. It's a lot easier to write for market than to try and retrofit an existing book back onto what you find from some tool like the KDP Rocket tool that Dave Chesson talks about, or looking at the K-Analytics reports for particular market sectors. I mean, even things like finding a category that's easy to chart in might appeal to some people. Some people may want to be a bestseller in the floor tiling section on Amazon. Then they can have the Casio saying they're a #1 bestseller, even though they've only sold 2 books. So thinking about the market in terms of mainly Amazon, it is worthwhile doing, whatever your motivations. And you probably want to be doing this before you start writing the book. My next piece of advice is to appreciate that things do take time. This is something where I fell foul of with my first couple of books, in that I didn't realise how long it took to get things like cover designs back, and how long it took to get ISBNs ordered. And similarly, if you work with an external editor, then you're going to have to book in time with them. And that, depending on the editor you use and your relationship with them, that in itself could take several weeks. They may not be available for several weeks. So this is something that you do want to consider in terms of your planning, is rather than saying, oh, I finished my book, I'm going to release it in a week's time, you probably want to start looking at things like getting the cover designed or buy a pre-made cover, and booking your editing in before you make any commitments in terms of when you're going to release your book. You may even want to go down the longer pre-order approach and say pick a date 3 months in advance, or even 6 months in advance. Can work well on sites like Apple. So don't forget about the fact that things take time with your book. And that's going to include marketing and trying to get reviews as well. This is something where I've been terrible at. Terrible at trying to synchronize all of these elements. I've always I've done the editing now, I've got to get a cover done, and then I've got to think about marketing, and I'm a very kind of one thing at a time person. And I think if I want to be more successful, I need to be, let's get these things kicked off and get a proper kind of project plan together. Slightly contradicting what I said about it's not too hard, but this isn't really rocket science. It's just a case of looking to see, I think it's going to take about this long to get the book edited. I think it's going to take about this long to get a cover designed. When you get the cover designed, the cover designer, if you want to create a paperback book, will need to know how many pages are in your book. So you need to format it, or get somebody to format it for you, before the cover design person can finish doing their spine widths for the book. And you see that there is a certain amount of project management to this, which is why I come back to the starting small. If you start with an ebook, you don't have to worry about spine width because you haven't got a spine on an ebook. And you can then start to concentrate on things like getting the editing sorted out and the marketing plan sorted out without having to worry too much about the intricacies of print formatting and design and mixing it up with a cover width. The next thing I would want to say is that you want to, if possible, start capturing emails and leads from day one. Now, if you're a brand new author, then unless you're a total social hermit, you're going to get quite a few sales from friends, relatives, and people who may be social media followers, people who are just curious in your book. Now, I know from bitter experience, you can't rely, and it's unreasonable to rely on these people to buy every single one of your books. But for the first book that you create, any kind of following you have, whether that be friends, family, people from a blog, a church group, maybe you run a local radio show or something like that, and a lot of those people will go out and buy your book. A lot of those people will review your book. And that will, if you're lucky, give you enough sales to boost you onto an Amazon chart. And once your book is onto an Amazon chart, then you'll start getting sales from other people. People you never heard before. These are people who discovered you via Amazon rather than through your friends and relatives. Now, obviously, any marketing efforts you make are going to boost up the amount of sales you get in general over and above what Amazon can provide you. But being able to get into an Amazon chart gives you so much visibility. And once you start getting into what they're called the also boughts, where people who bought this book also bought that book, then you can start getting constant sales even after your book falls out of the chart, because people will look and see, oh, that book about floor tiling that this person wrote, there's another book that this other guy wrote, and that could be your book, and people could get it because there's only 2 books in the floor category. I'll maybe take that example a bit far, but Amazon does sell books for you if you sell enough books into it. Now, the great problem is with later books is that because you can't necessarily rely on those existing connections you have. I mean, people may buy the odd book here and there, but you're not going to get this big rush of people that you will with your first book. So a mistake I made, and I did start an email list, it just kind of withered at the vine, and I changed email suppliers and I lost addresses, and I didn't really keep up sending people emails. If you have an email sign up in the back of your book, then those initial secondary people who bought your book because they saw it on the Amazon store, a proportion of those people will sign up for your emailing list. A lot depends on how big a chart you managed to chart in and how much other marketing you did. But those secondary people who've got the emails of are like gold dust. They are the people who you are going to be able to send review copies to, and who are likely to be interested in your later books, assuming they're not too different from your original book. Treat them like royalty and send them regular email updates. Give them lots of free stuff, because they are the people who are going to try and, if you get enough of them, these are the people who are going to be able to push you back into the charts when you release your next book. And similarly, you can capture leads off those next books, and you see how it works. This is why people say, like, oh yeah, just email your list. The question is, like, if you haven't got a list, how do you get a list? And there are various people who will tell you various ways how to do this. But I think that initial push that you get off your friends and family and whatever following you've got, if you get email addresses from the people who see you after you've charted, then that'll give you an enormous head start with all your later books. My next piece of advice is kind of related to the previous one, which is you're going to have to learn marketing. You just need to get over it. This is obviously more true with people who are writing fiction. Non-fiction people, generally speaking, seem to have come to the realisation they need to know how to market their book. Though, of course, you could be writing a spiritual book or some book about something where you're just trying to make a point rather than sell books. But if you want your book to be a success, you're going to have to find some way of marketing that works for your book and helps you create sales in it. Now, hopefully you've managed to capitalise on enough of the following that your first book gets. Maybe you have been diligently working as a volunteer in a church with 20,000 people attending it and they all buy your book. But even so, even if you have managed to generate a large email list of people that you can send emails to and they will buy your book, learning marketing really can't do anything but help boost your book. And that's why a lot of the focus of this show is about marketing. It's also the fact that I quite like marketing. I haven't truly mastered any of it yet, to be fair, as you can see by the fact my books aren't charting highly. Though a lot of that is, if you're trying to boost up a book that has no existing sales, it's very, very difficult. I mean, obviously there are things like BookBub and the like where you can try and push up your book, especially if you're prepared to discount or give your book away free. But most of them require a certain number of reviews, so you need then to get reviews from somewhere, so having an email list of people to send to comes in good. But I think a certain knowledge of marketing is required, and it's not, I don't think it's as simple as saying just get a BookBub or just use Facebook advertising. I think you need to have a kind of curiosity about what's out there. There's loads and loads and loads of possible ways to market books. And when you see marketing done well, it's almost sort of graceful. The dreadful buy my book or automated Twitter message or direct spammy approach. I mean, that can work, but trouble is everybody's trying that. And the people who have success with this kind of almost carpet bomb marketing approach are doing it on an industrial scale. They're sending out like thousands of automated Twitter messages. And for most of us, well, there is some possibility you can do this kind of thing. Most of us are going to have to get to the point where we understand who are the kind of people who are buying our book, where are they, what social media networks are they using, what websites do they look at, what other authors' books are they reading. And this is something I'm guilty of as anybody, is you need to understand your book and understand the sort of people who read your book, and then find out where they are and learn the marketing required to find those people. And you're going to have to do it. And you're going to have to get over it. And it's not that bad. It's not. Marketing can actually be very entertaining and fun task if you give it enough attention. And it doesn't have to require being salesy at all. Marketing is not sales. The sales engine you're using is genuinely Amazon or the other online retail stores. Marketing is about getting your book in front of people, and there are 101 different ways of doing that. And once you find out the way that works for your book, then you've got another great way to push it into charts and let Amazon and other online retailers start selling the book for you. My last piece of advice is kind of obvious, but isn't said enough, is that there are no guarantees of success. You can do absolutely everything right, and something may happen that could totally derail your book sales. You could have written the most fantastic lesbian zombie romance book ever known to mankind, and you started writing it and you researched the market beforehand, and everybody was really hot on lesbian zombie romance. But then the bottom falls out of the market and everybody goes off. Some new trend has come along. 50 Shades of Purple has become the new romance hit, and nobody wants to read your lesbian zombie book. Even though you did everything right, you picked a trending topic, you did all the marketing, it just didn't work out. Or it could be that you did this and then hundreds and hundreds of similar books all flood the market. And again, it could be just bad luck. But the thing is that if that is the situation, then I wouldn't get too disheartened. You just need to dust yourself down and start again and learn the lessons of why that doesn't succeed. If it's genuinely just due to bad luck, then you have to be in the position where you can think, well, I did everything right, so if I just do everything right again, and I keep doing it right, maybe tweak things here and there that I saw didn't go right, because nobody's perfect, then eventually I'll have success. In fact, from a philosophical point of view, there's a lot to be said that people who have instant success are often, in the long term, a lot more unsuccessful than people who have success after a long period of trying. Because people who try consistently release, say, one book and then another book and then another book, none of them are successes. Each time they're looking to improve and they're looking to make it better. While people who have an instant success, very easy to fall into this mindset of, I already know, I'm already an expert, there's nothing more I need to learn. And it's the old, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. the trouble with that is that sometimes people have success they purely happen to be the first person who wrote the lesbian zombie romance book that's the new hot trend. They gave no thought to writing to market. And then when they keep writing those kind of books and everybody's moved out of that area, then they may not have the success in the long term that they would if they had failed. So I don't actually think that failure is necessarily a disaster. I would never obviously recommend that you try and fail, but if you do fail to have success in terms of massive sales for your first book or your second book, then obviously don't give up. Just look to see where the failures were and try and improve them. And sometimes it may be just that there weren't any major failings. It was just timing. It was the wrong time. In which case you can just keep doing the same stuff and eventually you'll get success. So that's my rather long-winded advice for somebody looking to self-publish a book in 2017. Speak to you guys next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.